Hey guys, we will be beginning dot at 5. We've just here set up everything out here and let's hope that it's going to be a fun session to attend.
So, bro, your face is not showing.
Hello everyone. I hope you guys have joined. Today's session is going to be super fun, and we have put together a few slides where we're going to be taking you through the process and some tips and tricks on how to test smartphones. Now, I know everybody owns a smartphones. Everybody who's watching this stream, I'm sure they own at least one smartphone, and they also have. You guys also have a fair bit of idea of how your smartphone works. But what if you get approached by, say, some relative of yours about, they state you a budget and ask you what's the best phone that I can get in this budget? My priorities are a good battery life, maybe a good camera, and so which is the best phone really? And to answer that questions, you need to understand a few aspects of how a smartphone works and especially what to look for in them to know whether this one's a good smartphone or a bad smartphone. Well, there's no such thing as a bad smartphones, as you can see on your screen. All smartphones are good, but some smartphones are better than others, and we'll tell you exactly how to take your pick and choose the right smartphone for you, and how to test it out as well. So we're going to begin, and let's see. So, smartphone testing in essential can be divided into three essential broad categories. That's what we do here at Digit. One is core performance, then you have your camera performance, then there's battery life, and a couple of other things like design and display, which is important, but since it's very subjective, we can't really do a test to ensure that this is a good design and this is a bad design, right? So, three basic areas to test out for, and a first test is going to be for 1 minute. See, yeah. So the first test is on the core performance and looking at how the UI works. Now, what do we mean by the core performance? That means how well the hardware that powers your smartphone, including your CPU, GPU, basically the SoC, your RAM, your storage, your display, and everything performs top notch. And you do get a good experience because of the spec sheet that you get with the smartphone. So to understand how the core performance of a smartphone is, we look at a few good things. That includes benchmarks apps, of course. We do and very in-depth benchmark analysis. And then we look out for the display quality and understand that for display quality, you do need a specialized machine and instruments to test out how good a display is, but we usually use our own discretion and side-by-side comparisons to understand display quality. Then there's real-world usage and gaming and software performance. So I'm going to take you through, let's start with benchmark quality first. So this is benchmark. These are the benchmark tests that we run. That includes Geekbench 5. We use the CPU test of the Geekbench 5, and we get two scores. One is for single core performance and another is for multi-core performance. Both scores are important to understand how your device is going to act up or perform while there's a heavy game while playing or while you're multitasking. Then there's 3D Mark slingshot test. We test both the OpenGL version and the Vulkan version. And 3D Mark gives you a good idea of how the GPU of your smartphone works. If it gets a very good score, any score in the lines of around 2000 to 3000 is a good score on 3D Mark. On Geekbench 5, anything for a score of 500 for a single core performance, or 2000 for multi-core performance is really good. Um, Going back next is to the next app that we use is Antutu. Of course, everybody knows about Antutu. It's that one popular app that all your smartphone companies like to tout, that one score that they like to tout to claim that, our phone performs better than your phone, right? And Antutu is a sort of a holistic benchmark app that looks at your CPU, GPU, UX, memory usage, and all the other things, right? And it assigns you a good 5-6 digit score that determines where your smartphone ranks in its rankings. So the best smartphone out there, which is right now the iPhone 11 8 iPhone 11 Pro Max, that hits a score of around 400,000 to 500,000. And while the others Android phones are also in that benchmark, but not quite at there. Now, then there's GFX Bench, of course. GFX Bench, 1 minute. Right. So this GFX Bench also tests out the GPU of your smartphone, and it performs like there are couple of tests in the GPU GFX Bench app, and there are tests that's like Aztec Ruins, there's Manhattan, there's Car Chase. These are the 3 tests that we perform on GFX Bench. What these tests do is they run a standardized video and see just how many frames that it's a standard video, as in like it's a video game sequence, and it tries to determine how many frames the smartphone has been able to render. More number of frames means the GPU on that smartphone is pretty good. Then there's Andro Bench. Andro Bench checks out your storage speed. So it checks for sequential read-write speeds as well as random read-write speeds. And with new storage modules coming in like UFS 3.0, Andro Bench does give us a good idea whether a smartphone that claims the latest storage module does actually perform that fast. Then there's Mobile Expert 3. Mobile Expert 3 helps us determine the smartphone performance using like basic everyday tasks like creating a slideshow, editing a photo, running face recognition, and everything else. So it calculates the number of time taken by the smartphone to perform these tasks, and this time comes out in seconds. So the lower the time taken by a smartphone to perform these tests, the better the smartphone is. Then there's PC Mark Work 2.0. It's more or less in the same line as Mobile Expert 3, but on a much more popular, more broader level. The scores are can be checked out on PC Mark's website as well. And PC Mark Work 2.0 is perhaps a most robust, consistent, and reliable workload that we have for smartphones to test out. Synthetic, that is. And lastly, we have Game Bench. This is unfortunately a paid software which we use to test out gaming performance, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Let's move on to the next one. We have display testing, right? So in display testing, ideally there is a couple of instruments that we can use, like a color meter and everything else, to understand how good the colors on the display come out, or whether the sharpness or the color saturation that you see are perfect. So all those things can be determined by a high-end machine that comes with its own complicated software, which we're trying to acquire, but we're not there yet. But for now, we use this app called Display Tester, right? And Display Tester is a pretty simple app to use. It's available on the Play Store. You just download it. It's a very tiny app, and you go ahead to the test section in that app and select on defective pixel detection, and then it displays a whole cycle of solid colors, which basically is a test for defective pixels. So if your smartphone, you've used it for quite some time and you feel that some part of the display is not showing colors or anything, this is a good way to test out whether there is some pixel issue in that display. Otherwise, we use it we have a benchmark device like the Galaxy S20 Plus or the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and we use that device side by side with the one we're testing to see how much difference can we perceive with our naked eye. If there's very little difference, very little variance, then it's a good display. Definitely, it's emulating what the iPhone gives you. And if it's not, then we determine how cooler, how warmer the shades are, and then decide whether it's a cooler display or a warmer display. Then we also run a slide of specific images across two smartphones kept side by side, and then we compare the color reproduction, the brightness levels, localized contrast, and all those things. So keep in mind, this is again a very subjective matter as of now, unless you have access to a high level display tester, right? Otherwise, you do have to rely on your discretion. And if you can get a hand on, say, a very good flagship smartphone, just keep them side by side and see just how the display looks like. Make sure you use consistent stuff to compare things with, so that going forward you can also keep in mind that, okay, I tested this image and this image looked like this in that smartphone way back, so I remember that this smartphone should be better than that smartphone, right? So understand, it's pretty simple. And then we have gaming performance, which is pretty crucial these days, considering PUBG Mobile and COD Mobile and Fortnite and Asphalt 9. All these are super popular games for smartphones, and a lot of players here in India do participate in competitive gameplays and also play casually. So gaming performance is really essential. It's something that a lot of smartphones also bank upon to sell their device, and we test out exactly how games run on smartphones by using this app called GameBench. GameBench lets you see the frame rates that the game is able to deliver in real time, as well as check out very granular information around the CPU, GPU, memory usage, and a lot more. Now, unfortunately, this is a paid app, and you do have to shell out thousands of dollars to get access to it. But if you don't have access, that's fine, perfectly all right. Just use your own discretion and keep a keen eye out for frame drops. That's a very bad sign of a smartphone performing while gaming. There shouldn't be any drop in frames or stutters or lags whatsoever because of the hardware. Now, you may face lags because of your network, but that's a different thing. So you do need to be on a very stable network to understand whether there are any frame drops. Then there are things like overheating while you're gaming, which we have experienced in some budget and entry level smartphones. And you also look for things like how well the graphics look like, how well the textures come out, whether it all looks damn realistic. And for this, it always helps to have a reference device, something like, say, a top end iPhone, or even a new OnePlus 8 or OnePlus 7T will work fine. So that's how you should test out games. Now let's move on to the next big thing, which is the camera performance, right? Everybody knows that smartphones these days have almost replaced point and shoot cameras. They haven't really out there, haven't really gone to replace the DSLRs quite yet, although a lot of companies will claim that, my smartphone takes DSLR worthy photos. That's pretty, you shouldn't really get into it, because DSLRs are still far more advanced than what a smartphone can do. But having said that, if you have a good smartphone in your hand that has a good camera for a vacation, it's going to be perfectly fine. You won't really miss your DSLR all that much. Here's how you can test out your camera on your smartphone. So I'm going to quickly finish through this presentation and then go back and take all your questions, so that we remain in sync. So let's start with how you can test out images from the camera. Now this is important and something that everybody, whether they're trying out a smartphone in a store or planning on buying one, will test out eventually. So first thing to keep in mind is you need to take consistent samples. So make sure you have some prop in your house or some object or element in the frame that is constant, that no matter what phone you have, that is the first shot you take, so that that one shot will be your reference photo for across multiple devices. So you can just look at a multiple set of multiple photos of the same thing and determine, okay, this photo looks better, and then you go back to check which phone took that photo, and you say that that phone was better at taking that particular frame. Now look at that frame properly, or examine it. Look for things like clipped highlights where there overexposure happening. Look for details in the shadows as well as the dynamic range, right? The details in the shadows, suppose like you're taking a photo of a wide landscape where there you can see a lot of trees around. Zoom in to see how well the leaves look on the trees. That should be a good idea of how well the details are reproduced. And then look at whether areas which are brightly lit as well as poorly lit also get good exposure and are well detailed. So that will give you a good idea of how the dynamic range is. So these are the few critical things that you need to look at while examining an image. Now, a lot of smartphones these days come with 48 megapixel cameras or 64 megapixel cameras, and today we even got a 108 megapixel camera from Xiaomi, right? And all these companies, they boast of very high resolution photos, but just how good are they with the details when you zoom in? For that, you need to take a 100% crop. How do you take a 100% crop? You open that image on your image browser on Windows or your Mac, and you select view at 100%. Moment you see that, your pictures are going to blow up and take up your entire screen, and you can see very granular details. Just take a snipping tool or a screenshot tool and crop out some part of it and paste it out, compare it side by side with one another's phone with a high res sensor, and you're going to get an idea of how the details come out between two high resolution sensors. So 100% crop is really important when a company promises a lot of details in their photos. Now you also need to shoot in both indoor and outdoor conditions, because they vary a lot. Indoors the light is very tricky to nail, while outdoors it's if you're out there in afternoon where the sun is directly overhead, there's a high chance of your highlights getting clipped, right? So look out for those things. Look out, test out all the features of the camera, things like AI, scene recognition, things like chroma boost in Realme phones and Pro Color in Xiaomi phones, and a lot of other things, right? So make sure you test out all these things and do keep noting and keep taking notes of what you observe, so that you don't forget when you, excuse me, when you do eventually end up when you do eventually end up taking making some content around what you have tested. Make sure you don't really forget about it. Also, do remember to take close-ups of faces and objects. Portraits are a very good indicator of how a smartphone camera actually works. Faces are probably the trickiest thing to nail for a camera, and if a camera is well optimized, it's going to make faces look really nice. Now moving on, you have another big segment that is blowing up these days, and that's videos. And cameras with phones with multi-camera setup lets you shoot from all different lenses and different modes. They come with super steady modes and a tripod mode, or even an HDR shooting mode. So all those things you need to explore first. So you need to look at how the videos work at 4K resolution with 60 FPS, if it supports at 1080p at 60 FPS, and so on. Then there would be slow-mo videos that go all the way up to 960 FPS. Know that there's a difference between interpolation based 960 FPS slow-mo and hardware based slow-mo. So think phones like Samsung Galaxy S20, the previous S10, the iPhones, everyone, they all do hardware based slow motion videos, while phones like the Poco X2 or the more affordable smartphones that promise high slow motion recordings like 960 frames per second achieved via interpolation method. So there is some difference in output. You will get the best results out of a hardware enabled slow mo camera as compared to an interpolation based method, right? Then you also need to check for noise in your video, check for glitches as well as stabilization. Now all high-end smartphones, most of them at least, come with some sort of stabilization, be it OIS or EIS, or there's a new term called AIS which combines both and uses machine learning to crop out some part of the frame and stabilize the video. You also need to check the output that you get for audio from your video from the camera app. Phones like your high-end Nokia phones or your iPhones and LG smartphones, they're all pretty good at capturing audio while you're recording a video, while the lower-end phones like say a Redmi 8 or a Realme C3 will struggle while recording audio from far off places. Now there are also new features like audio zoom, where you just zoom in your viewfinder and the audio gets amplified from the source. So that's another feature to check out. Just do keep an eye out on the spec sheet and the list of features that the smartphone lists out, and the best way to go about it is to keep ticking off one feature after the other after you have tested them out, right? And there are also filters and effects, right, for videos that you can also capture. Lastly, you have a night mode shot. So low light have been the Achilles heel for smartphones all this while. It's because the sensor size have always been very small as compared to your DSLRs. So even if you could take theoretically about long exposure shots, there would be noise in the output, final output that you would get. So smartphone companies have worked around it, and they have come up with dedicated night mode that takes a burst of shots one after the other with different exposure settings, and then algorithm in the background merges them together to give you a good crisp output. Now the test here is to see just how long it takes for that smartphone to take that particular low light shot. Basically keep taking one night mode shot after the other and see the time difference between taking first shot and the second shot. Just also see how long it takes for the phone to process the night mode shots. That's going to give you an idea of how fast you can use your camera again after having taken a night mode shot. And then you look at the basic things like presence of noise, a lot of look at the details and how well they're reproduced. Look for dynamic range, like whether some portion of the frame is just too dark and completely blacked out while some are very brightly lit. That shouldn't be the case. It should all be very evenly and uniformly lit. That's the sign of a good night mode. So yeah, that's basically how you test out the camera. And then certain things like battery life is basically the dark horse of smartphone experience. Now, because there's really no good if the smartphone already, or like, it dies out after like 6 hours or 4 hours of usage, and it's not a good experience when you ask me. If it might promise a lot of features, but if it can't deliver a stable at least a day long battery life, there's no point in getting that smartphone, right? So to understand battery life, again, there's no perfect test for battery life right now. Everybody uses some sort of synthetic test bench to understand how fast the battery drains. And battery life again depends on person to person and their usage, right? A person may be a heavy user and might face the battery draining like within half a day, while another might be a very intermittent user and may see his smartphone going all the way till the end of night, right? So a good way to test out the smartphone or the screen on time, which we call in technical lingo, is to download this app called Battery Log from the Play Store. It's again a very tiny app, but it's very powerful. Make sure you give it all the permissions and set priorities so it always runs in the background and doesn't stop. It doesn't capture location data, so you don't have to worry about privacy all that much. And you have to press on start logging in the app, so that every time there's a drop in percentage, it's going to get logged in that app. So by the end of the day, after you have used, and make sure you use it heavily, and by heavy usage we mean by playing lots of games, capturing videos, editing photos and the likes, just by the end of the day, see how where your smartphone stands, what the charging status is. If it dies before sunset, then you definitely, there's something wrong with the battery and the usage is just way too high, or it might be a low capacity battery which might not be adequate for most users, right? So you need to take a look at that. So that's your test for screen on time. Again, it's not a perfect test. There's no formula to determine how long that smartphone will last for everybody out there who buys it. But a good way to see is to see just how long it takes for smartphone to drain from 0 to 100 in normal usage. Make sure you do the same test for around 5 days to 6 days and take an average out of it so that you have a good base number. Now, you also have to do a charging speed test, because fast charging is becoming the norm these days and people are promising up to 50 watts of charging, right? So how fast do these smartphones charge? Make sure your phone is at around 1% to 2% charge. Keep a stopwatch handy right beside you and plug in the charger. Keep logging how much the smartphone has reached the charging percentage after every 10 minutes, 15 minutes or 30 minutes, and then see how long it takes to reach 100%. You need to perform that gives you an idea of how the smartphone is going to charge when it's kept idle, right? Now do the same test again, wait for the battery to drop again at 1%, 2%, and start up a game, open up a game and do a charging test, 15 minutes of it, and then keep an eye out on whether this phone heats up while you're playing or whether there are any frame drops while you're playing. So that should explain how good the smartphone can take a lot of current while it's operating at its peak, right? And then we're here at the last, there's the video loop test, and this is like the longest test that we perform here in our Digit Labs, and that is to download a high-res video of a 1080p that's free to use. Do not pirate, do not steal others' content. Download something that is free to use, and that can be of any duration. It doesn't matter, right? And download a VLC player and load up that video, and then put it on loop and keep playing and playing and playing. Keep the phone aside, don't use it while that's on, and make sure all the things are well, like things like Wi-Fi and cellular data are turned off in the background, so there's no interruption. And you can just see just how long that video can run. So keep the battery log app again in the background running, and just keep logging. It's going to log every time there's a battery drop till the point it reaches 1%. It's going to save that log in an Excel sheet, and you can get it right after the phone restarts once you're done with the test. So that was it. That was basically how you can test smartphones sitting right at your home. Thanks a lot for joining this session. I am gonna go and take a look at all the questions um, in the live chat that you guys have left, right? So let's quickly browse through. The first question here is Akhil is asking, hi Shubhrajit, is there any benchmark for cameras worth running on all platforms like Android and iOS? Um, yes, there are for cameras, right? So you can't have benchmarks for cameras, right? So a photo that it outputs is basically the benchmark for it, and how the photo looks like, you have to use your own discretion, your own experience of looking at good photos, and for the best results, take like the best camera phone, say an iPhone or a Samsung high-end phone, and then test out the camera in respect to that. So that's your benchmark, that's your reference device, right? Let's see. Next question. Um, can we determine, Pranit is asking this question, can we determine a smartphone's hardware only performance, keeping the OS and software aside, as software hinders some part of the full potential? Well, Pranit, it's a good question, but to be very honest, doing so won't really give you anything concrete to talk about, because a smartphone is basically a culmination of both hardware and software. Both of them need to work together to give you that best experience. Otherwise, you may have say a high refresh rate display of that goes up to 120 hertz, but if you have a very entry level processor, you won't really get much out of that display, because the processor won't be able to render that many frames in real time. So you also need to understand that the software is as crucial as the hardware on your smartphone. So this really shouldn't be any need to look at your hardware performance only keeping the OS aside. But if you do really need to check it out, there's this app that we talked about called GFX Bench, and while it won't really give you raw CPU numbers minus the hardware, it will give you the GPU performance numbers without anything showed on the screen. So there, the GFX Bench have a bunch of off-screen tests which run some calculations and renders in the background to test out how fast the GPU can ramp up without being hindered by a poor display. So that's the max that we can tell you about it. So yeah, that's more or less it. And let's see. How to check for refresh rate? Arzu is asking again. That's a very good question. Lots of phones come with high refresh rate displays. Um, a good way to test is there's something that we call the UFO test. It's readily available on your browser. If you have a smartphone with a high refresh rate display of 90 hertz, 120 hertz or sorts, go to this website, just go to search on Google, you're going to get UFO test. Head to the website and just play the video, and you're going to see a sequence of say cartoon UFOs passing by on your screen, and there will be modes to switch from 16, 90 and 120. If you see, so once you select say 90 FPS and you have a 90 hertz refresh rate display, both of them should sync. If the refresh rate is a little patchy, then you're going to see some frame drops while you're seeing that video, and that can be a very good way to check out uh, how good the refresh rate is, or whether it does have a higher refresh rate as promised, right? Others is asking for an app that gives real-time FPS while playing games. There is one app, but it's unfortunately a paid app. You have to shell out thousands of dollars to use it, and it's mostly used by reviewers like us, or software testers, or smartphone manufacturers, while they are optimizing games for their devices, right? So the app is called Game Bench. You can check it out on the Play Store, and they also have a website. And if you do manage to get a subscription from them, there's an easy way to just connect it through your connect it with a USB cable with your laptop, and you can just fire up the desktop app for Game Bench and see the frame rates in real time. That's how we determine our frame rates in our reviews and comparison videos. But otherwise, there's not much of an app to check out the frame rates on Android devices. That's because Android, to do that without using GameBench, you first have to root your device, again, which is a whole different process altogether, which we probably going to tackle someday, some other day. Let's see, right? Uh, how to compare the UI UX of phones. Again, the reason why I didn't touch upon the UI experience on while in this presentation is primarily because UI again is a very subjective issue. I personally have a big problem with MIUI or Vivo's FunTouch OS, particularly for the notification spam that it subjects their users to. But I'm also a great fan of the Oxygen OS UI, and of course iOS, right? So both these UIs are again clean, easy to operate, doesn't slow down, gives you a lot of features. Samsung's One UI is also part of that list. But things like MIUI and Realme UI, all these things do have some do lack some sanitation and some aesthetic upliftments that that I look forward to, at least. But again, UI and UX is again very subjective, and so I leave it up to the user who's actually buying the smartphone to uh, determine whether it's a good UI to use or not. I do list out the features that you get on the UI, or if there's any problem as such, for an informed decision to be made, right? Uh, that's it. Let's see if there are any more questions that we can have. There's a lot of tips that you guys are leaving in the threads below, and all of these are really good tips, and you guys are already pretty informed about how to test smartphones. But I hope that I've been able to be of good help for you guys. And let's see, I'm going to wait for a few more questions. Oh, Harsh is asking a very good question. He's looking for a camera phone to capture the moon as he sees from his eyes. Harsh, I have some very bad news for you. So, there was a smartphone that launched last year that claimed moonshot mode. It's a Huawei P30 Pro, and it came with a periscope telephoto lens that would technically let you zoom all the way up to 50x using a combination of hybrid and digital zooming. But a big caveat that you have dropped in your comment is basically to see the moon as you see from your eyes. Now, the resolution that your eyes can see is far, far, far higher than what any camera in this world can really produce, right? So unless you have like a very powerful micro telescope and you attach your smartphone camera at the end of it, and then you capture the moon, then there's no other method or hack, rather, to capture the moon as you see with your naked eyes with a smartphone camera, right? Akhil is asking how to see if there's noise in image or in video. Akhil, good question. So if there's a lot of noise in your video, and noise mostly comes when the ISO count is very high, or when there's little light but you are still you have some objects in your frame, right? And you're going to see small checkered patterns in your video, or certain elements in the dark areas of your video, which will look like dots or grains whatsoever, which is basically what we call image noise or digital noise. That's the result of a smaller sensor and high ISO settings. So like your sensor is very sensitive to light, right? So moment this if you get the sensor can't really process all that much light, that's when you're gonna start seeing so much noise in your photos and videos, right? uh, let's see what other questions do we have. Ankit is asking a very good question, just in curiosity. What is that PowerPoint template you are using? Well, Ankit, this isn't PowerPoint that I am using. I made this presentation using this software called Prezi. It's an online available software, and some of their features is for free, and you can use it. It's pretty good. Where can we get the color testing, color histograms and chart, which Digit sometimes uses, the monochrome graphs and histograms? So we actually paid for those graphs. There are companies that make these high resolution graphs that you put up with adequate light, and then test your camera out, and that gives you a very granular idea of how your camera performs. But that may not always coincide with how the camera performs in real world. This is more or less a lab based test where where you can be absolutely sure of just how far or how many straight lines that your camera can determine at a distance, right? So that's where your color charts and histograms come into play, and we do use it, and the ones we use are all paid, and you can get them made from a reputed studio or somewhere else. um, let's see how to filter smartphones on the basis of performance and not on basis of money. Arzu, that is again a very good question. You're on a roll today, I'll have to say. And based on performance, again, you have to look at an overall performance metric. What we do is we have divided different aspects of the performance, like CPU and GPU performance, battery life, camera, gaming, into different weights. We assign different weights to it, and then we calculate a score based on the weight, and we arrive at a number. And that number does take into account certain things called value for money and the price. But we do also have digit 01 awards, where we only look at performance with no regard for price whatsoever. There we just subtract away the value for money score and take only the performance section. We don't look at the design, we don't look at things like the features it offers or the price that it has, right? So that thing is one way to check out how the smartphone performs regardless of its price, right? But price does come into play when you go to the market and actually have to buy a smartphone. So keeping the price in mind is also pretty important, right? What can we test when we test 6 to 7 smartphones? Okay, Akhil, Arzu, and Akhil are the only ones asking back-to-back questions, and I am going to take them one by one. Let's see. Uh, which one do we do? Oh, Akhil, that's an awesome idea. If you can just share that application or Windows platform which does display the FPS and average FPS and latency for videos or games, it would be really great. We will look into it, and if it's really good, we will be featuring you in our website, and we'll be talking to you definitely about it, right? And Arzu is asking how to compare the UI UX. I think I've taken this question. Which smartphone do you use? What do you think about the criteria before buying a smartphone? Well, I'm here, unfortunately, or fortunately, I have the privilege of choosing the smartphone I want right now without paying a single penny for it. And that's because I get the smartphones as part of the review team from the brands to test them out. And my present smartphone is the ROG Phone 2. and I use it mostly because I game a lot. I play Call of Duty Mobile a lot on the smartphone, and everything on the smartphone except for the camera is top notch. It has a 120 Hz refresh rate display, which is super smooth when you're operating in the UI. It has a 6000 mAh battery that easily lasts beyond a day for me. Even if I game almost like half a day, which isn't the case these days. Very sorry, unfortunately. And otherwise, yeah, except for the camera, this is a really good smartphone to use, and I do like using the smartphone a lot. Otherwise, I do have the Redmi Note 8 Pro and the Realme 6 Pro as backup, and which I'm also testing out for a comparison to be done later. And then there are a lot of other devices that I'm not allowed to talk about right now, so let's not talk about it. Right. Uh, are all these testing software paid on iOS or does it have free ones too? A good question. iOS testing is a little trickier because some of the benchmark apps that we use, like Geekbench for instance, is a paid app. It's not very expensive, it's 50 bucks on the App Store on the iOS devices, and you can easily pay for it and download it. But you won't get apps like Mobile Expert 3 or GFX Bench or some other apps like Android Bench that we use. So in that case, for iOS device, we don't really use those apps because there isn't any way to test out those aspects. But otherwise, yeah, most of the apps, at least the popular ones, are available across platforms for both iOS and Android, right? Um, Akhil is talking about Pixel 4's astrophotography mode. Yes, that is a really intelligent way that Google has, achieved astrophotography. But again, based on that question that one person asked specifically of capturing the moon as they see with their naked eyes, that is still not possible even with Google Pixel 4's astrophotography mode, right? And do you think custom ROMs would take up the place as primary OS of brands? Aman, I don't really get your question, what you're asking. Custom ROMs are still a third party solution and still a risky solution at that. Not everybody is recommended to use it. But having said that, there are a lot of custom ROMs that do enhance an aging smartphone. Installing a custom ROM on a latest smartphone might be a little counterproductive because not all features might be optimized or be enabled, so you will be losing out on the experience if you switch to a custom ROM with a brand new smartphone, right? Kunal Mishra is asking what all should a good review include. Kunal, I'll give you a quick cheat sheet to follow. Moment a smartphone launches, you're gonna see a lot of hype around certain features that your company is gonna claim that my smartphone is the best in this area, and then they're gonna run you down through a very elaborate presentation, going with how fast the processor is and what it can do and how good the camera is with some custom like some shots and everything. Your job as a reviewer is to check out how many claims that that brand makes stands true, because admit it, only a small subset of the users that actually see an ad for that smartphone they're planning to buy will see your review, but they're going to see your ad all right, and they're going to know that these are the things that a smartphone claims it can do well, and your job is to test out how well that smartphone do all those things. So I hope that answers your question, and it's a really interesting one. I kind of like it. Thank you. And Arzu is asking a very relevant question. A test should not be biased on the basis of brand, don't you think so? Yes, definitely. But having said that, you also need to keep a lookout on the USPs that your brand promises and whether they actually are USPs. Like, for instance, OnePlus likes to market the device around the speed that they offer, right? So, whenever you are reviewing a OnePlus device, the primary thing to look out for is just how fast the device is, whether there are any areas whatsoever where the speed actually slows down, and moment it does, it's your job as a reviewer to highlight that to the user, as well as for OnePlus to know about it so that they can work in the background and fix it, right? um, Additionally, how can we check the network reception ability? Oh, I think this is an additional question. um, I will go back to it in a bit. 5G will first be rolled out to IoT. I think this is an answer to some other question. Oh, you guys are having your own discussion in this chat thread, it seems. Nice, nice. Keep going. Um, Do you find the difference in 120 hertz and 90 hertz? If you look at 90 hertz and 120 hertz refresh rate displays, as far as games or videos are concerned, no, there won't be any difference whatsoever, because most videos run at 60 hertz or 60 frames per second, while I don't think any games, any high-end games for that matter on Android, run on 120 FPS or even 90 FPS. At least PUBG Mobile or COD Mobile doesn't, right? So in those situations, there's really no difference between 120 FPS and 90 FPS, 90 hertz refresh rate. But as far as the UI is concerned, yes, there's a significant jump in how smooth the UI looks from going from 60 hertz to 90 hertz, and some improvement. I won't say a lot of improvement going from 90 hertz to 120 hertz. So to put it in context, if you do own a 90 hertz refresh rate smartphone like say the OnePlus 7T, it's perfectly okay in 2020 right now to stick to it instead of going for a 120 hertz OnePlus 8 Pro. You won't really get a lot of improvement in your display experience, very honestly. Um, that's it. That was, I hope that answers your question. And there's a question on 5G I saw. What's your opinion on 5G in India? It's Romak is asking this question, and then there's a follow-up question around 5G. Oh no, that's not a 5G. It's basically an answer by Akhil, who is doing the job for me. Akhil, you are partly right. Yes, 5G is pretty much a no-brainer right now, because there's no 5G network in India. So all the smartphones that are claiming 5G connectivity right now are basically doing it at the compulsion of Qualcomm, because if there's a smartphone, if it's using a Snapdragon 865 device, it will have to have a 5G modem. Now, smartphone brands can either go the route that IQ took and didn't really add the extra RF modules and the antennas to enable 5G connectivity. So it's still technically a 4G device with a 5G modem, or you can, smartphone brands can go all out and include everything and ensure that it's future proof. But the fact remains that 5G is something that you won't be able to use in India right now. And even when it comes, your biggest impact of 5G won't be as much in speeds unless you're in a millimeter wave 5G zone. But as Akhil has pointed out very rightly, the first impact is going to be on IoT and machine to machine communication. You're going to see a lot of smart devices crop up. Smart cities are promised. I won't really claim that they are coming out, because the promise has been made way back in 2014 and we are still yet to hear anything concrete from that announcement. And you also have a lot of applications basically can be enhanced using 5G. At least that's what scientists and theorists and engineers are claiming right now. So unless that actually happens in action, we can't really know for sure. But 4G has really worked wonders for us. I am doing this session with you guys on a 4G connection right now with you, and it's pretty smooth. So 5G should definitely be an improvement over 4G. Just how big of an improvement that is remains to be seen. So with that said, I will be concluding this live stream. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this session. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you guys again in another video. So yeah, thanks for watching.